What we believe is a place called Marsh Farm. It's at Sandringham. Yeah. We've been looking at it this week, the last couple of days, and a lot of security fences are going up.
Some royal downfalls happen quietly behind palace walls, but this one is unfolding like a slow public humiliation, a royal exile that whispers one chilling message to the world. The palace has finally lost its patience. Because the man once known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, once wrapped in royal privilege, titles, and military honors, is now reportedly being pushed out of his own royal sanctuary and sent somewhere no one ever expected a prince to land. And the details are astonishing. Flood alerts, pest management services, a farmhouse that locals don't even describe as grand, not even close. That, according to multiple reports, is the place being prepared for Prince Andrew's next chapter, a place called Marsh Farm. Let that sink in. For more than 20 years, Andrew lived inside Royal Lodge, a massive 30-room mansion tucked into the Windsor estate, a place of manicured gardens, protected grounds, and royal security. It wasn't just a house, it was a symbol of status, a symbol that he still belonged inside the royal machine. And for years, many believed that symbol would quietly remain untouched. But now, something inside the palace appears to have shifted, because suddenly the story isn't about comfort anymore. It's about relocation, about eviction whispers, about a future that looks dramatically smaller. And the contrast between Andrew's past and what's allegedly waiting for him next is so extreme it almost feels symbolic. Royal Lodge, elevated, pristine, protected. Marsh Farm, rural farmland surrounded by wetlands in an area where locals are literally advised to sign up for flood alerts. Yes, flood alerts. And that's where the mystery deepens. Because the property isn't even a polished country manor. By most accounts, it's a functional agricultural complex, older structures, unused buildings, and terrain that connects directly to low-lying countryside. Not the sort of place you picture when someone says royal residence, which raises a question no one in royal circles is asking out loud. Is this simply a relocation, or is it a message? To understand why this moment feels so dramatic, you have to rewind the story. Because Andrew didn't always exist on the edges of royal life. For decades, he held what many described as a comfortable position within Britain's aristocratic hierarchy. He was a working royal, appearing at official events, holding prestigious military roles, and living in one of the most desirable addresses on the Windsor estate. Royal Lodge wasn't just a home, it was a declaration. 30 rooms, perfectly maintained grounds, security designed for someone of real public importance. And financially, the arrangement was incredibly favorable. Maintaining a property of that size would normally cost fortunes, but the royal structure meant Andrew carried little of that burden personally. For years, the assumption was simple. Whatever happened behind the scenes, some quiet agreement would keep things exactly as they were. But that assumption is collapsing now, because suddenly the palace narrative has changed. Suddenly there are deadlines. Suddenly there are moving trucks. And suddenly the question isn't whether Andrew stays at Royal Lodge, it's when he leaves. The real turning point came in 2019. That was the year everything started unraveling. The controversy surrounding Andrew's association with Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted sex offender, exploded into international headlines. For months, the royal family faced growing pressure over the connection. Then came the interview, the now infamous BC appearance that many people still describe as catastrophic. Instead of calming the storm, the interview intensified it. Viewers were stunned by what they heard, and perhaps more importantly, what they didn't hear. No clear sympathy, no emotional distance from the scandal. And from that moment forward, the consequences began stacking up like falling dominoes. First came Andrew's withdrawal from royal duties, then the stripping of military honors, then the quiet disappearance of his patronages and charity roles. Each step slowly peeling away the identity he had held for decades. But even after all that, one thing remained unchanged. Royal Lodge. That massive residence stood like the last piece of his former royal life. Until now. Because according to multiple reports, the pressure to leave the property has intensified dramatically. The latest claims suggest he has been told to vacate the home before January ends, with no sign of another extension. Which means the move to Marsh Farm is no longer theoretical. It's becoming real. And Marsh Farm itself adds another layer of intrigue. The property sits on the Sandringham estate, land personally owned by King Charles, not part of the Crown's official holdings. That detail matters because it means the king ultimately controls who lives there. And what's waiting at Marsh Farm is unusual. The landscape is flat rural farmland stretching into wetland territory. According to local guidance, residents nearby are encouraged to register for emergency flood alerts should the regional pumping systems fail. A recent risk assessment reportedly even flagged concerns about the Wolverton pumping station, warning mechanical problems or power outages could trigger emergency flooding responses. No one is claiming disaster is inevitable, but the contrast is impossible to ignore. Royal Lodge sits high, dry, and perfectly maintained. Marsh Farm sits in an area where flood warnings are considered normal precautions. And then there's the renovation frenzy. Because even before Andrew has arrived, activity at the property has reportedly been intense. Construction workers, electrical contractors, security specialists, heavy machinery moving around the grounds, and perhaps most awkward of all, pest control teams. Vehicles from Command Pest Control were reportedly photographed arriving at the farm, raising questions about whether rodents had already become a problem in the aging buildings. January, according to pest control experts, is peak season for rats and mice seeking shelter from freezing weather. And there's another curious rule on the Sandringham estate. Tenants aren't allowed to keep cats, which means one of the most natural rodent deterrents simply doesn't exist there. Was the pest control visit preventative, or was it already responding to an infestation? No one seems to know. But what it does reveal is something far more interesting. Marsh Farm isn't some pristine royal cottage waiting for a ceremonial arrival. It's a working rural property being scrambled into shape at the last minute. And the more details that surface, the stranger the entire situation begins to look. Because even as the public narrative paints this move as a dramatic step down, the amount of money and work being poured into the property suggests something far more complicated, which raises a chilling possibility. Maybe this isn't simply about downsizing. Maybe it's about containment. Because behind the scenes, the clock is ticking, the renovations are rushing forward, and Andrew's royal life is shrinking faster than anyone predicted. And just when it seems the situation couldn't become more chaotic, another shock appears to be unfolding inside the story, one that could leave Andrew facing this entire upheaval completely alone. The chaos doesn't stop with the house, because just as the walls of Royal Lodge are closing in, another quiet fracture appears to be happening behind the scenes, one that could leave Andrew facing this entire upheaval without the one person who has stood beside him through decades of scandal, headlines, and royal embarrassment: Sarah Ferguson. For years, their relationship puzzled everyone. Divorced, yet inseparable, living together long after the marriage ended, sharing the same home, appearing at events as if the split had never really happened. In a royal world where relationships usually freeze into formality, Andrew and Sarah remained strangely united. She became the one stable presence around him, especially after the Epstein scandal pushed him to the edge of royal life. But now even that constant may be disappearing. According to reports circulating around the move, both Andrew and Sarah must leave Royal Lodge by January 25th. And after that moment, their paths reportedly split in completely different directions. Sarah, it's said, has no intention of following Andrew to Marsh Farm. Instead, she may temporarily head toward Portugal, where Princess Eugenie has a residence. If that happens, the emotional consequences for Andrew could be enormous, because suddenly the relocation to Norfolk stops looking like a simple move and starts looking like isolation. A prince once surrounded by royal ceremony, now stepping into a rural property far from the Windsor Power Center, without the one person who has quietly remained in his corner for decades. And as if the timing couldn't become more tense, the entire situation is unfolding under a brutally compressed timeline. There are multiple deadlines swirling through royal circles. Some insiders claim the king wanted Andrew out by Easter. Others whisper that the real pressure date may actually fall around February 19th, Andrew's birthday. And somewhere between those dates, the clock is running down. Because Royal Lodge must be cleared, Marsh Farm must be renovated, temporary housing must be arranged, security systems must be installed, and all of it appears to be happening at once. People monitoring the renovation say the speed of the work is almost frantic. Heavy machinery has reportedly been spotted on the grounds. Electricians are modernizing outdated systems. Construction crews are reinforcing structures that had reportedly sat unused for years. And one particularly telling detail? A 6-foot wooden perimeter fence is being installed around the property. Why would a rural farm suddenly need that level of security? The answer might lie in the uncomfortable reality Andrew now lives with: public scrutiny. Wherever he goes, cameras eventually follow, which means privacy suddenly becomes a priority. Security cameras are reportedly being installed across the property, lighting systems added, access points reinforced. It's the strange hybrid of two worlds colliding: a modest farm being quietly transformed into something capable of housing a controversial royal figure. And then there's the entertainment equipment. Technicians from Sky VIP were reportedly seen installing high-end systems inside the property, which reveals something subtle but important. Despite the public narrative of a disgraced royal being forced into humble living, substantial resources are still being invested to make sure Andrew's next residence is secure and comfortable. And that contradiction is where the story becomes truly fascinating. On the surface, the image is simple. A fallen prince leaves his grand palace and moves to a flood-risk farm surrounded by rodents and renovation chaos. But beneath that image, another reality exists: money. infrastructure, security, protection, which suggests something very different from a simple punishment. Because if this were merely exile, the investment wouldn't be this heavy. Instead, what we appear to be witnessing is something more complicated. A controlled transition. A relocation designed to move Andrew away from the center of royal life without fully abandoning him. But even that controlled plan seems to be wobbling under the pressure of time. Because there's another complication quietly unfolding. Andrew might not even be able to move into Marsh Farm immediately. According to reports from the Times, the property renovations may not be finished in time, which means Andrew could first be sent somewhere temporary, an undisclosed location, while construction continues. Think about that for a moment. A prince who spent more than 2 decades settled inside a massive royal mansion, suddenly living out of temporary housing while builders scramble to finish a farmhouse renovation. It's a lifestyle shock almost impossible to imagine. And one renovation insider reportedly hinted at just how extensive the work really is. The house, they suggested, may require massive restoration before it becomes fully livable. So massive, in fact, that some believe it won't be ready until April, which leaves a strange question hanging in the air. If Marsh Farm isn't ready and Royal Lodge must be emptied, where exactly will Andrew go in the meantime? No one seems to know. And that uncertainty adds another layer to a story already dripping with symbolism, because this entire saga feels less like a normal property dispute and more like the final chapter of a long royal fall, from decorated naval officer to prominent royal representative to controversial figure pushed out of the spotlight, and now perhaps a man being quietly relocated to the edges of the royal estate system, a place far enough away from Windsor to fade from daily royal life, yet still close enough to remain under the protection of the crown. Two truths existing at the same time: public humiliation, private containment. And that contradiction might explain why the story feels so tense. Because the palace cannot completely sever ties with a member of the royal bloodline, but it also cannot allow that member to remain at the center of the institution. So what emerges is something awkward, something halfway between exile and protection. A rural farmhouse, flood warnings, pest control vans, security cameras, construction crews racing against deadlines, and somewhere inside all that chaos stands Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, preparing to leave the home that once symbolized his royal standing. The question now isn't simply where he will live next. The real question is much bigger. Will Marsh Farm become a permanent landing place, or just another temporary stop in a royal life that keeps shrinking? Because if the last few years have taught us anything, it's that Andrew's story never stops evolving, and the most uncomfortable twist in this royal drama may still be waiting around the corner.